Malo Lele, and welcome to another live digital kava session here on the Polynesian Eyes podcast. This is your host coming all the way from the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. Tuafala here. Mr. Aotearoa is busy with some family responsibilities, so he is tied up with that. So, for all the viewers and the listeners, you'll have to settle with Tua here as a Lone Ranger for tonight. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, Instagram. We were having some issues with X. I wasn't able to fully verify if the live link is publishing to X. We hope it is, but if not, we'll try and upload the video after the live session here. It's been a busy couple weeks with travel, work, and earlier in the week. So the last couple weeks. So I think last week we didn't have a live digital kava session, but we're trying to make up for it with our second one for the week. And this week, earlier in the week, we had a live digital kava session. Was primarily focused on a spiritual topic on the creation account, continuation of the creation account that we have, the series that we're going through. So was able to catch up on that. We'll probably issue that through the podcast here in the next few days. So until then, we'll update it at that point. Today, we have a handful of topics we want to walk through and share with everyone on the live digital kava session. The first one is, let me kind of finalize here for Instagram. Publish that. We do have to do one final step as we go live to get Instagram going. So we should be going live on Instagram as well. Wanted to start here saying thank you to all of our listeners, our viewers, and especially to our paying members on the YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate it, the support there. And we know, in the economic world that we're in, dollars don't grow on trees, but we really do appreciate those who see value and contribute to the Polynesian Eyes podcast. As always, if this is something that you find value in, please become a pay member. We have a couple subscriptions that you can pick from for a monthly contribution, a kava bag, or you can also share with the super chats and the super thanks, whether it's in the comment section or in the videos, or also in the live comments as we go through the live show here with the super chats. We do make a special effort to recognize paying members. So one of the benefits of being a paying member is not only do you get first access to early access, I mean, to some of the episodes, especially the interviews that we take, but also we do recognize you and pull you up anytime you comment during a live digital kava session, because you do have the icon showing that you are a paying member of the channel. So first things first, wanted to kind of talk through something that we have seen, that we've discussed in the past, and that is how important it is for Polynesian communities um, around the world to be invited by the native country back home and to the motherland within Samoa, Tonga, Fiji. Obviously, in the case that we were talking about was the Tongan government and how it could probably benefit severely, or get more bang for the buck if they had more efforts to focus on Tongans that are abroad to come back to Tonga for visits, vacation, and also potentially to move back, right? And bring a lot of talent with it back, and also the financial investment that would come by reconnecting with the Tongans overseas. So I thought it was pretty interesting. We'll start with a picture that was shared by Tonga Tourism, and then a couple videos that I think, hey, I don't know if some of the people at Tongan Tourism are listening to the Polynesianized podcast, but we did see some messaging that seemed to align with some of those ideas, which we had never really seen before, which is why we brought it up on the Polynesianized podcast, because really do think that that is an area that the governments and the economies throughout Polynesia could benefit from, is to reconnect with the Polynesians that live overseas and really draw them back to the islands. It just makes a lot of sense in so many different ways that it's just something that I think would be of great benefit. So first, I'm going to start off with this picture here. You may recognize this gentleman. I think his name's Kulisi or Chris. He lives in Tonga. He married a Tongan. He lives there. But I think this picture kind of captures the concept that we're talking about. Obviously, it shows Palangi man with his spouse and his Hafekasi Tongan kids, and them visiting Tonga, right? And really reconnecting and rebuilding that connection with the culture and the island itself. That to me is a very powerful message, especially in a world today where there seems to be a epidemic of lack of identity and purpose, and that is a very inviting thing that the Kingdom of Tonga and every Polynesian island, Samoa, Tuvalu, Tokelau, all the island groups in Polynesia, that this is something of great value that they can offer the diaspora and all the Polynesians living abroad. And it is to give that connection that drives meaning and gives them a anchor, so to speak, as they go around the world to say, I am Tongan, I'm Samoan, I'm from Tokelau, I'm from Tuvalu, like, in the Kiribati. This is the identity that they can hold on to as they navigate through the challenges of life. And so I want to start with that picture, which I thought was really cool. It expresses that idea there. And then I want to go into the ad that they used that kind of expresses this as well, which I thought was pretty cool to see. So we'll kind of go through this and then kind of react to it. I think that is pretty cool, to be honest, right? What we're seeing there is exactly what we're talking about, right? It is reaching out to the diaspora overseas, whether they're full Tongan living abroad or Hafekasi living abroad, and bringing them back to Polynesia, reconnecting, restructuring themselves, and orienting themselves within the Polynesian culture, and especially here with the Tongan culture. And I think this is a very powerful message, and this is a message that can go a very long way in so many different ways, not only for the diaspora, but I also think for the economic situation of Polynesian nations. Obviously, for a lot of these Polynesian nations, remittances are a big deal, but also I think it's an untapped power for foreign investment. When I grew up in Tonga, and even hearing now with what the government's doing, they're always talking about trying to get investment to build economic activity from all these foreign governments, which is still important. I'm not saying disregard that, but getting this foreign investment into the local economy and trying to get foreign businesses and foreign investors, it's a hard sell, but really trying to capture and reconnect with the diaspora overseas, to me, is not only an easier sell, but it's a higher return on the dollars that are spent to advertise to try and get those investments to come in. And we're going to build upon this concept um, as we go into some other things that we'll discuss on topics here, like how to maintain sovereignty. We're going to look at an article that was written about how Polynesian nations can navigate sovereignty in the 21st century. Kind of talk about that. This is one of the ways that I think is really critical, and then also kind of talk into some oral history and some questions and videos that we were tagged on online that can really strengthen the Polynesian connection of the diaspora and the origin nations as we go through the 21st century and the new world that we live in. So here's another video that was shared that I believe kind of builds upon the same concept about attracting, connecting the diaspora overseas. So you have like a Polynesian person that's coming back to Tonga. You belong. And I think that would be a great tag maybe to build on. Maybe we're overthinking it and think that we had any influence in that. Hey, we like to say that. It may have been no influence in driving that message. All I know is that type of messaging we have never seen before, or at least in my experience from Tonga. And I think the fact that we were talking about it and mentioning it here on the podcast, and then to see the exact messaging that we're talking about now come out is maybe it's coincidental, maybe it's not, I don't know. But the point is, this is a very powerful message, and it's a message that is going to influence the diaspora overseas, and it will also influence the Tongan government and and the economic situation that is in the kingdoms of Tonga and also in the Polynesian nations. Looks like we got a note here from Mr. Aotearoa who's chiming in. Maybe that first video didn't have any audio. Apologize for that. I did see a pop up saying that the browser may have been disconnected, but some technical difficulties today. But appreciate the heads up on that, Mr. Aotearoa. So as those who, if you're listening and watching, if you kind of run into that similar situation, just give us a heads up. um so looks like the videos are not populating the sound as we were hoping. Not a good sign. All right, well, let's see a couple things here. Maybe I might have to restart the browser. Let me try that. I'm going to close the browsers here real quick and reopen. Hopefully, they'll repopulate the pages. We were trying to populate the pages so that we don't have to open all the new windows again, but that may be the case here. What quick reminder to everybody: if you have any questions, comments as we go through the live digital kava session, don't hesitate to add it into the comments, and we will do our best to get to it. And if you really, really want to make sure that we add um, that we add your comment, make it a super chat, and we'll do our best. We'll make sure that we get to it. So, with that being said, we're gonna pivot a little bit, and we're gonna go to. Let me go to Speechify real quick. We're gonna go in there. Hopefully, um, the sound is back because I did take a article from online and try to convert it to a audio setting so hopefully that is something that works out better. Mr. Ataro, if you're listening, hopefully you can kind of give us some feedback on whether you can hear the sound. Hey, Audria, appreciate it. Thank you. Welcome to the live digital kava session. So we're gonna play this. Hopefully the sound comes through. Give me a heads up if the sound's not coming through. But we're gonna look at an article here real quick, and let me see if I can find the image that I wanted to share because I did think it was interesting. So the article is talking about how to navigate sovereignty in the 21st century. Um, let's go to this. Let's go share this tab. So it shows an image here, kind of during the Cold War era, and it shows all these Polynesian nations in there. And I'm assuming the reason why Tonga is in here, but it's not circled, and Hawaii, because during these times Hawaii was still independent, and Tonga has always been independent, and so really did not necessarily have a colonizer to kind of direct their allegiance. So this we're going to kind of walk through this article, and hopefully the sound comes through on the Speechify here, and that way we can just kind of listen through it. But if that doesn't work, we'll pivot to kind of me maybe just reading it out. So we'll start, with the article here, and it's written by Tevita Motulalo, and we will go from there.
Reimagining Pacific Sovereignty in a New Great Game by Tavita Motulalo, MSc Geopolitics and International Relations. As global power shifts from rules to raw capacity, Pacific Island nations face a stark reality. Sovereignty in the 21st century may depend less on flags and more on collective strength. If the world is moving toward hard power and strategic control, the Pacific must decide whether to stand alone or stand together. The inherent
And I think this is something that's really important. As he mentioned here, there's this idea of, as we shift towards hard power, the reality is independence is always underpinned by raw power. That at the end of the day, if you don't have raw power as well, you always have raw power as the underpinning concept. And it is power that is used correctly in a rule of law or structure that allows soft power to navigate law and order. But I think we've been living in such a peaceful time that the world has forgotten All right. Well, it looks like we're back. We're running into some connectivity issues, um, which is a little bit frustrating. But it is what it is. What happens when you live and you do the live shows? You live. So, with that being said, I mean the underpinning concept here is we tend to forget that raw force or power is the underpinning of any society, and this idea that you know hard power doesn't exist to bring law and order is a false idea. We've been a little too comfortable and a little too fortunate of not having to always fall upon hard power to guide, but having law and order. But the reality is, at the end of the day, if you don't have power, this idea of peace through strength, if you don't have if you don't have the capacity to enforce law and order, then someone who has the power and the capacity to enforce chaos or brutality will manifest. So, with that being said, we'll continue. So I think that's kind of interesting, and it's true, right? Especially this part talking about how the modern map of Polynesia um, was driven by foreign borders being drawn by foreign powers, right? As they went on, the Polynesian Empire was cut into pieces. We all recognize that. Obviously, here on the Polynesian Eyes podcast, we take the position that Polynesia was a united group of islands that were one nation, and that one nation was under the you know what? I don't think I shared this, so we're gonna have to go back. My bad. Let's go back here. As I was listening to the video, I didn't realize I didn't share, and I didn't. And if I didn't share it, then I don't think people would have heard it. So maybe a rerun for everyone, but we're gonna come back to this part here. Hopefully everyone can
The
hear it.
inheritance of empire. The modern map of the Pacific was largely drawn in the cabins of 19th century European ships. Borders were not shaped organically by the peoples of the ocean, but formalized through imperial negotiations and colonial administration. These lines reflected the logic of empire and trade, not indigenous political imagination. There were attempts to think differently. The proposed Confederation of Polynesia envisioned an archipelagic state stretching from Hawaii to Tahiti, from Fiji to the Solomons, a unified oceanic political entity rather than fragmented colonial territories. Later, the formation of the Pacific Islands Forum echoed elements of that ambition. Yet even that effort operated within the geopolitical constraints of its time, with Australia and New Zealand eventually seated within the very structure designed to balance outside influence. For decades after
Yeah, real quick, just like I said, the Polynesian Empire was caught chopped up by Europeans through colonization. Um, this is kind of interesting where there was a proposed confederation of Polynesia. I do believe that Hawaii may have been pushing such an effort. If I remember correctly, I do hear some of those stories. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, Polynesia, from our perspective, was a unified nation for hundreds, really possible for thousands of years. And that was primarily driven under the Tuitonga's efforts to unite and build relationships and maintain those relationships throughout Polynesia.
World War II, the Pacific existed within the stabilizing framework of the Anglo-American-led order. Colonial borders were preserved under international law, and sovereignty was treated as settled. But as that global order weakens, an uncomfortable question emerges. Why should the next phase of world politics continue to respect boundaries created by empires that no longer exist? The myth of permanent sovereignty. One of the quiet assumptions of the modern era is that sovereignty, once granted, is permanent. History suggests otherwise. Major geopolitical transitions, from the Treaty of Westphalia to the collapse of empires, do not merely redraw borders, they redefine the meaning of statehood itself. We are
Want to pause it there real quick because the reality is, as what's being mentioned here in this article, sovereignty is always at risk. It is always at risk. There is no such thing as guaranteed sovereignty, right? Because everything is built with the underlining concept of you must have force, you must have power to maintain order and structure. And whenever that power is conceded or weakened, then you're subject to chaos and loss. I mean, let's use the example of Tonga, who has maintained independence throughout thousands of years. Even before the modern era and the quote unquote democratic movement that Tonga has now, and there's this discussion of, oh, the people want to be free, the oppression of the royal family, which is, there's a lot of propaganda behind that, and the burning of the capital. 100 years earlier, there was same potential risk that existed, right? With Tupou II going into Queen Salote, Tupou III, there were riots in Nuku'alofa, and it was because the Tupou family was under pressure from existing chiefs and the challenges of the economic situation and the debt that Tonga had was putting pressure on the Tupou family. And so, as there are with human beings, there's always a challenge for leadership and power. And with Tupou the First, a lot of his children and a grandson taking over, and the economic, and then Tupou the Second did not have a male heir, and so Queen Salote becoming the queen went against thousands of years of tradition in Tonga of kingly lines being maintained from father to son, father to son. The rumors are the reason why Queen Salote was taken and educated overseas. Yes, there's better education overseas, but one of the drivers behind it was for her own security and safety. And as you can see, even within Tonga, who's maintained independence, losing that independence is a real possibility even before this whole situation that Tevita is sharing here. There's always a risk of losing sovereignty and independence or law and order. We assume law and order is just the natural state of what human beings want. But as we see in the world now, law and order is only law and order if you can enforce it, and the chaos that's going on. Going back even further, Tupou the First was able to maintain enough unity to maintain Tonga's sovereignty. And even then, military power is not enough to sustain long-term governance, right? To provide legitimacy. And Tupou the First, though he was the Tuikan Kupolu, though he did have the strongest military force, so to speak, and also the government structure, but that did not make him the most powerful or influential or most durable leadership structure. Why? Because the Tuitonga had existed for thousands of years, and for several hundred years, maybe close to 1,000 years, had delegated that power of military, government administration, and the governance of the daily affairs of the Tongan Empire to a lower king, the Tu'iha Takalawa, and then later to the Tu'ikan Kupolu. And that structure had been in place for a very long time. And so with Bo the First coming into power, in a sense, there that was not necessarily a legitimate claim to become the supreme leader of Tonga and the country, because the Tu'i still existed there. And this is the thing that we're talking about, that to have legitimacy, it's not always through political and military might. That's one thing. To legitimacy, a lot of times, is that you've been gifted and entrusted with a certain power and capacity from the right source and from the right authority. And what am I referring to? I am referring to the last Tu'i Tonga, Laufili Tonga, providing Tupou the First with a taumafakava, right? Which was something that was only applicable to the supreme and the highest leader or position in all of the Tongan Empire. And it was not driven by military force or government administration, though those are others of power, right? Really, what Laufidi Tonga was able to provide to Tupou the First was something that he could never claim himself. It is something also that the first Tonga could not obtain by military force or by government administration. It is bestowed. That type of legitimate power, so to speak, or legitimacy of governance is something that's bestowed. And the first received it from Tangaloa, who resided on Tongatapu and governed the empire from there. Aho'etu's legitimacy of his rule was because the Tangaloa, Etu Matupua, who was the leader, authorized a kava structure and a formation of government that legitimized the Tu'itonga as the head of the Tongan Empire. That is exactly the same thing that Laufidi Tonga provides to Tupou the First. And even with that, it was a very difficult thing to navigate, but it would have been extremely impossible to unify or to legitimize Tupou the First rule if Laufidi Tonga did not endorse or legitimize Tupou the First's rule by giving him a taumafakava, by sending his farefa to structure the taumafakava. And what's so important about the taumafakava? All Tongans know that the taumafakava is given to the legitimate leader and ruler, and that it is something that is bestowed upon you. This is not something that you can conquer. This is not something that you can purchase. This is not something that you can flatter your way into. It is bestowed upon you from the right authority to legitimize your rule. And I think this is something that is really important as we listen to this, because this is an important concept to understand. Right? And this is a fair question coming up. The sovereignty of the Polynesian nations is always at risk, has always been at risk, but as the instability of the world increases, the sovereignty of these Polynesian nations become higher and higher at risk.
Moving from a rules-based order toward a more openly realist one. In this environment, sovereignty is less a legal entitlement and more a capacity. It depends on economic resilience, technological infrastructure, military reach, and strategic leverage. For small island states, this shift presents an existential challenge. Many lack the demographic scale or industrial base to influence great powers on equal terms. If international norms weaken and raw capability becomes decisive, fragmentation becomes vulnerability. Today's global leadership, whether in Beijing, Moscow, Washington, or elsewhere, increasingly views the world through strategic calculations of depth, access, supply chains, and resources. In such a context, colonial era borders are historical facts, not sacred guarantees. The death of distance and the rise of digital dependence. For centuries, the Pacific's greatest defense was distance. Isolation acted as a moat. That moat no longer exists. Technology has collapsed geography. Satellite constellations, undersea cables, digital platforms, and cloud infrastructure now form the backbone of governance, finance, communication, and national security. When critical systems are owned or controlled externally, sovereignty becomes more complicated than a flag and a seat at the United Nations. A small island state may retain formal independence, yet rely entirely on foreign-owned digital infrastructure. In such conditions, power does not require territorial conquest. Influence flows through systems, contracts, and connectivity. The commodities of the modern era are not spices and plantations, but data, rare earth minerals, energy corridors, and strategic sea lanes. Control over these networks shapes the next phase of global competition, fragmentation, or
And that's a fair point. If you want to access the infrastructure of the world, that is something that you have to be able to navigate, and that's a dependency. But you could also look at it as that isolation that can be enforced and sovereignty maintained is through the simplification of life and going back into a simpler life and not heavily relying on those technologies and that infrastructure. That means many times means less opportunity, but there's always a trade-off, right? There are certain advantages of being small. And the certain advantages of being small is you are less likely to be exploited or attractive because you are a smaller market, smaller region, fewer resources. Um, that can be a positive. The negative is kind of expressing here. The negative is you become heavily reliant on these foreign powers, foreign infrastructure. But if you look back at, you know, really for the bare necessities of life and for survival, Polynesian nations, if it's simplified and you go through a simpler approach to life and not over globalizing, which is a huge temptation, because the more you globalize, the greater the dependence. But if you can leverage it more where we're just connecting the diaspora and the locals living back on the islands and using that economic relationship to drive the growth back on the islands rather than being dependent on foreign infrastructure and foreign investments, that will drive more self-reliance and more independence for the islands back home. But I definitely agree, if you want to engage in the commerce of the 21st century and so forth, there is some level of reliance that is conceded.
consolidation, the Pacific now faces a defining choice. The current model is fragmentation. Individual states negotiate bilateral security arrangements, infrastructure loans, or resource deals independently. While often necessary, such arrangements can create asymmetries and strategic tensions between neighbors. When states negotiate alone, they negotiate from weakness. The alternative is deeper regional consolidation, not simply dialogue forums, but structural alignment. This does not require the erasure of national identity. It requires coordinated sovereignty. If the Blue Pacific were treated as a unified strategic space, a liquid continent rather than scattered dots, the region could aggregate its maritime zones, economic leverage, and diplomatic weight. A collective framework could negotiate with major powers from a position of scale rather than isolation. This is not about dissolving states, it is about amplifying them. The Australia-Pacific question. Any serious reorganization?
No, and I mean, I understand the concept of negotiating from a collective. The only real issue that I have with that is two, even as a collective, the scale is still not there in regards to market size, land mass, and overall power to project influence. Though there is a minor improvement, I don't know if that improvement is significant enough to really get a benefit in return, or whether it's each individual country building relationships um, and maintaining those relationships independently. I'm not sure that the collective has enough of a push behind it to really make a difference.
Of Pacific strategy inevitably includes Australia. For decades, debate has framed the relationship as a binary. Will Australia dominate the Pacific, or will the Pacific resist? Australia increasingly recognizes that its security is inseparable from the stability and strategic alignment of its northern and eastern neighbors.
Nothing against Australia, but Australia really has, even if we included Australia as a in the collective, it's not going to have enough pull or strength behind it. Just population wise, economy wise, even if we included Australia into this collective idea, it's not going to have enough pull or influence. You're going to need the major powers. Um, you're going to have to pick a side, in my opinion.
At the same time, Pacific states understand that standing entirely alone in a harsher geopolitical climate may invite pressure from larger powers. The emerging possibility is not absorption, but structured interdependence, a Pacific community in which Australian capital and security capabilities align with Pacific geography and sovereign decision-making. Such an arrangement would need to be negotiated carefully, transparently, and on equal terms. But the logic of collective resilience is becoming harder to ignore, an imaginative
I'm
challenge.
not sure.
The deeper challenge is conceptual. Can Pacific leaders imagine sovereignty not merely as inherited independence, but as shared strategic power? For centuries before
Really, what it kind of sounds to me here is globalization on a smaller scale, which I'm totally sure is a good thing either, right? I mean, just look at the European Union. European Union is used to force independent nations to coerce them to do things that they don't want or like. And just look at what the European Union does to Poland and some of these other European nations that are more conservative, and forcing them into immigration, or at least pressuring them into certain immigration positions that they as a local do not like. That's one of the reasons why I'm somewhat concerned. Like I said, this sounds like globalization just on a smaller scale.
European contact, Pacific societies navigated and governed vast ocean spaces through networks rather than rigid territorial lines. The recent period of state-centric globalization may prove to be an anomaly in longer human history. Regional power blocks, not isolated microstates, may once again become the norm. If that is the direction of travel, the Pacific must decide whose orbit it will enter, or whether it will create one of its own. Remaining fragmented risks, long-term dependency, and external competition played out across coordinated consolidation, the possibility of redefining first century, not as isolation but as structured strength. The new phase of the game, the emerging global order, resource access, military positioning. Political is no longer simply about independence, it is about interdependence, on whose terms and under what structure. The Pacific can continue as a collection of individually sovereign but strategically exposed states. Or it can build a durable regional architecture that converts geography into collective power. The choice is stark: consolidate and shape the next era, or remain divided within it.
Interesting. You know, I really I understand the concept here. I just don't know if a Polynesian collective or Pacific collective, even if you add New Zealand, Australia, not sure it's got the juice. Just look at NATO and how ineffective it is in addressing Russia, right? A single nation, and and the NATO having so many of these, first world nations can barely do that. Then you have that's even before you get to the United States. I mean, I know the United States is part of NATO, but let's just pull the United States out, which is kind of happening under Trump. You pull the United States to the United States. And so, though I understand the concept here, I really just don't see what a difference this will make. It's one of those conceptual ideas that kind of makes sense, but when you look at the pragmatic scale, I'm just not sure how a reimagining, so to speak, that's a pretty well there, um, Pacific sovereignty through that. uh, as mentioned, Tonga in the late 1800s, early 1800s, late 1700s was navigating a similar situation, right? How does a small island nation survive colonization where there's chaos, raw power, um, colonial grabs for strategic positioning are happening everywhere? And really, it boils down to a king dedicating his land and people to God and a strong legacy of unified government and leadership over thousands of years, that spread throughout Polynesia led to that. So that was kind of an interesting article just to kind of walk through and think about. So the next part, we're gonna go over some videos that we were tagged on, and let's start with this one first. Next one, we're gonna talk about, Tuikanukupolu, some of the history of the Tuitonga and Samoa, and it is somewhat tied to this idea of sovereignty and the European nations drawing boundaries that didn't exist, and that's leading to some chaos in trying to understand the history and the relationship of Polynesian nations. Um, let's go here. And this was a video that we were tagged in, and basically, I think, was it Facebook? Let me see if I can pull it up. I think it was a Facebook tag. Let me see if I can find it. It's on Devita Fale's Facebook page, which we do get a heavy amount of traffic. So I don't know if I can find it real quick, but I do want to see the question or the comment that was made. Mm, Trying to see if I can find it. And it was basically just saying, was that the right, or am I thinking about a different one here? Apologize. When we had to reset everything basically got closed, and all the work or the items that we were okay. I think this is it. I think this is it. I think I found it. All right. So I'm gonna share this, pull this up. So we were tagged in this by someone on Facebook. Comment on it. I was trying to respond to it real quick when I had a couple minutes, but let's watch the video first. Let's watch the video and then come back and kind of and come back to it. Let's see here. We lost connectivity for a second. A lot of technical issues today. Let's press play here.
The third and
Let's
most
start.
powerful line of by 1610, the third and most powerful line of kings emerged, the Tuikanokupolo.
So when the Samoans came, they found the place, found at home. So now we've got this, yes, the beginning of the Kanakapolo.
The Tonga people in Hahaka in the east didn't want to go and face the Hifo people who started to, these uprisings from the Hifo. They decided to bring the Samoans to go and sort out the Nata and his Samoan relatives. They puppetized them and recruited them to the Samoan team, and they formed their own lineage.
Oh, there you go.
Nata. So when they moved there, Korovai was one of their residents.
Okay.
But their main residence was Ahab. So that's the main residence of the Kanokupolo. And then Kanokupolo, the village of Kanokupolo named after Upolu, a flesh of Upolu, Kanokupolo.
Proud Samoan village
The
of
origin
Kanukupolo.
of the
Very interesting.
Tucanopolo political system, it was a Samoan political system that was established in Hifo, not even a Tongan system at all.
This Samoanization or the Matai influence in Tonga, it's very powerful the way that influenced how Tonga's shift from the Kauhala Uta, the Tuitonga line, into where we are now with the Tuikanupolu line.
In order to build up political power and military power, the Tucanukupolo's
That
got
guy
to bring
looks
outside
familiar.
people. And so that's why there's this influx of Samoans. Thousands of Samoans
Manono
were
was
brought.
already part of that with
Yeah.
Polo and Savai, bringing thousands of their people to mostly staying in Hifo.
The Samoans from the Tuikano Kupolu royal line all married Tongan women. This is a small list of some of their descendants in Tonga today.
Now, we understand that the king was also bestowed with the more ancient title, Tuikanupukopolu title. How significant is that?
Yes. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the Kanino Samoa in Tonga is through Kanakupolo, which is on the western side of Tongatapu, the main island here in Tonga. So at the moment, this king now, King Kupolo VI, is installed the 24th Tuikanokupolo. So that's a long reign from the Tuikanokupolo, and it's a very exciting time because the village of Kanokupolo has been celebrating. Yesterday they've had fashion shows, they've had cultural performances.
By 1610,
Very interesting. And we're gonna kind of walk through this, right? Let's come back to the comment we were tagged on Facebook real quick. And then the comment was, how did the Tongans let this happen? This is from Boomtown Bullet Iseula. Our nickname for him is Gout Bullet. So Gout Bullet commented here, how did we let this happen? Right? And the idea is how did Tonga allow this overtaking, this invasion, this civil war, so to speak, that the Tuikanukupolo takes over and Samoa takes over Tonga? And that is the problem of not understanding history and understanding how Tonga and Samoa are connected and understanding why these things happened, right? We'll come back here to Samoana 80 here. He states here, or she states, the Samoan Tuikanukupolo dynasty are the rulers of Tonga today. The literal translation of Kanukupolo means flesh of Upolu, Samoa. In the late 1500s or early 1600s, a large number of Samoans voyaged and settled on Tongatapu, which led to the establishment of the most powerful royal line in Tonga. This Samoan royal line eventually conquered all of Tonga by first eclipsing and absorbing the Tuihatakalaua royal line. And at a later period, the Tuikanukupolo line waged war on the Tuitonga line, defeating and abolishing the Tuitonga title. Okay? Now, this is the reason why we kind of had that sovereignty article that we brought in and trying to navigate sovereignty in the 21st century and how do we recognize that, and how, you know, at the very foundation of any society is force. And you build upon that force for rule of law, custom, uh, heritage, and social systems that help you prevent disintegrating into just the force part, right? Once you just fall into the force part, it's civil war, it's chaos, and there's problems that exist. Now, I want to walk through and address, let's start with just addressing the comment from Sam, or the comment accompanying this video, right? The Samoan Tu'ikanukupolu dynasty are the rulers of Tonga today. Now, this is very interesting because is it really the Tu'ikanukupolu? Like, I understand they installed the Tu'ikanukupolu title on the king. But the question really becomes, when you look at lines of descendants, lines of titles, one can make the argument it's not the Tu'ikanukupolu line that is leading Tonga today. Though I understand that's the title that's being installed. But in Tongan culture, titles are inherited from father to son, father to son. Land is inherited from father to son, father to son. And so that is the traditional way of inheritance and structure. As I mentioned earlier, what Laufidi Tonga, he empowered Tupo the First, the Tu'ikanukupolu, by freely, remember, he's not forced to do so. He freely gives the Tu'ikanukupolu the Taumafakava and that legitimacy. You have to remember that the Tu'itonga is the most influential and the highest ranking title or kingly line in Tonga, right? There is no, and we'll get to the other things they say there at the bottom, but just take that to the bank. That was the highest and the most legitimate ruling rank in Tonga with Laufidi Tonga. He's Catholic. You got to remember, yes, Tupou the First is highly aligned with England and the Wesleyan Protestant type of religion there, but Laufidi Tonga is closely aligned with the Catholics. You have the French, you have the Portuguese, you have the Spanish, very powerful nations as well. And you can just imagine it, that you could have the Catholic nations speaking to Laufidi Tonga, the Tu'itonga, saying, you're the highest rank. Why don't you pull that rank? You have all these Catholic nations and empires behind you. You also have Tupou the First, who also has power and influence, and he has the English Empire backing him. That's what happened in Samoa, right? There were one part of the Marietoas and one, the Tuimanuas, whatever. One has Germany back them, one has or whoever. That eventually leads to the split of Samoa, the colonization of Samoa, right? Because of the inability to consolidate power, to build unity, to build social structure, and to provide a unified and legitimate leader. That's what led in all Polynesia and potentially all the world. So what he does, what Tangaloa did to the first Tu'itonga, he at the environment that he is in and the situation says, what is best for my people and my nation? And he does something miraculous. And you know how miraculous it is? Because no one else in Polynesia did it. No one else in the Pacific did it. I don't even know of anyone else in the whole world who did it, right? To sacrifice the legitimate of a nation, to legitimize another line, another authority to unify and give the nation the best chance that it has to maintain independence. And you have the same family. Laufini Tonga and Tupo the first are cousins. They grew up together in Mua because the Taula in Mua of the Tui, the Taula in Tonga is the one of the Tui Tonga is the one that saves Tupo the first, cures him from curing from sickness that allows Taufa Ahau to get his name. That's where he gets his name, Taufa Ahau. And so what I'm getting to is the Tuikano Kupolu is a descendant, or the king today is a descendant of Tungi, which is the Tuihatakalawa. And you can make the strong claim that it's the Tuihatakalawa line that is leading Tonga today, right? They're carrying the Tuikano Kupolu title. But that's not the first time. This is not the first time that the heir of the Tuihatakalawa is also carrying the title of Tuikano Kupolu. Muliki Ha'amea, who was the heir of the Tuihatakalawa, carried the Tuikano Kupolu title for a few years until they could install someone else. So first things first, the rulers of today do carry the Tuikano Kupolu title, but by bloodline, they are the Tuihatakalawa because their father, Tungi Marefihi, was the Tuihatakalawa line and was the heir. The little translation, we'll go to the next part. The literal translation of the Kanukupolo means flesh of Upolu, 100%. Agreed with that. In the late 1500s and 1600s, a large number of Samoans voyaged and settled on Tonga Tapu, which led to the establishment of the most powerful royal line in Tonga. Okay, let's correct that. Okay. The Tuihatakalawa established the Tuikanukupolu, and it was because the Tuikanukupolu was established that Samoans were brought in to serve the Tuikanukupolu, right? This was not some mass migration of Samoan people, though we're all the same people. It's hard to say. It's just we have to say it now because of how we understand the world. The same people. But Samoans did not migrate to Western Tonga Tapu and then establish the Tuikanukupolu. The Tuikanukupolu was established, and then people were brought over to Western Tonga Tapu to serve and run the affairs of the Tuikanukupolu. Why? Because the Tuitonga and the Tuihatakalawa are still on Tonga Tapu, and that is where a lot of the existing population are loyal to. And because they're then the Tuikanukupolu, the loyalty is there. So you have to import this labor. Remember, the job of the Tuikanukupolu was to do the day-to-day work. It is not, it's kind of considered below the Tuihatakalawa and the Tuikanukupolu, I mean the Tuitonga roles at the time. And so that is why they came in. They didn't come in and then through coming in that they established the Tuikanukupolu line, which is kind of what is implied
by
that comment, which is incorrect, right? So we'll try and get through this. A lot of
So we by 16.
Sorry for that. There's a lot of technical issues today, so we're gonna try and work through this. The next statement here. This Samoan royal line eventually conquered all of Tonga by first eclipsing and absorbing the Tuihatakalaua royal line. And at a later period, the Tuikanukupolu line waged war on the Tuitonga line, defeating and abolishing the Tuitonga title. Okay. Once again, this idea that the Tu'ikanukupolu is a Samoan royal line is not the right way to think about it. If that's the if we'll have to go back. Let's step back one more. You have to understand that the Tu'itonga, the Tu'ihatakalawa, and the Tu'ikanukupolu all came from, if you want to use the Tongan Samoan, Tongan males. There was never ever a Samoan male that was brought in and they ran. And when I say Samoan male, that the heritage of a male was a Samoan father to a Samoan grandfather to a Samoan, in the sense of from the patriarchal line. So we really have to understand that even the Tu'ikanukupolu had a Tongan father from a Tongan grandfather, great grandfather, just like the Tu'itonga, just like the Tu'ihatakalawa. It was always from a Tongan male line. The mother could be from anywhere else in the Polynesian Empire, right? Could be from Uvea, could be from Samoa, could be from, Tahiti, Hawaii, wherever else in the Polynesian Empire. But the male was always of a Tongan male line. So this idea that it was a Samoan royal line, that's it's the same false claim on trying to say that the Tu'itonga is a Samoan male line. They had Samoan mothers at times and at periods, but that's not the case here. Then here's the evidence for that, right? And then it says here that it took over shortly after a later period that Tu'ikanukupolu waged war on the Tu'ihatakala. Like I said, it was the same family. And there's certain things in the video that the video says that we can address, doesn't give it context. They chopped it up in a way to just kind of portray the ideas that they want, but we'll give more context to that. Then it says here that the Tu'ikanukupolu waged war on the Tu'itonga, defeating and abolishing the Tu'itonga title. I would like to have them name which Tu'ikanukupolu waged war on the Tu'itonga. I would like to know that, because that would be news to the whole world. A lot of people falsely say Tupo the First was the one who defeated the Tu'itonga because he quote unquote defeated Laufiri Tonga in Velata. Now, there's even some debate on that, and this is where politics and propaganda happens. The Methodist side say Tupo the First one. There's some people from the Catholic side who said no, Tupo the First never won, and that they had battles and possibly Laufiri Tonga won, but either point Laufiri Tonga had to return to Tongatapu. Why did Laufiri Tonga have to return to Tongatapu? Because when they fought, Laufiri Tonga was not the Tu'itonga. He was just a potential heir to the Tu'itonga line. But as you know, the Tu'itonga has multiple children with multiple women from multiple islands, right? But Laufiri Tonga is selected to be the next Tu'itonga, so he goes back to Tongatapu. Any battles that they had was before Laufiri Tonga became the Tu'itonga. What happened after Laufiri Tonga became the Tu'itonga? Taufa'ahau never conquered the Tu'itonga. He never went into Mu'a, the settlement in the Hahake, like that one bro. Oh, the Hahake, the Tu'itonga. Well, Tupo the First never went into Mu'a, Lapaha, to conquer the Tu'itonga. Why? Because the Tu'itonga is above political interfering. He's above war. He's above these things. He is a religious authority that supersedes all those things. Tu'itonga had delegated military, political, administrative power hundreds of years before before the Tu'ikanukupolu ever existed, the Tu'itonga never dealt or had given up that responsibility to the Tu'ihatakalawa hundreds of years before the Tu'ikanukupolu even was a thought. Okay, so this idea that the Tu'ikanukupolu was a Samoan royal line and came in and just started beating everybody and took over, and it was because the Samoans came in. Number one, Tonga and Samoa were the same nation all under the Tu'itonga. The reason why they came over is because the Tu'itonga dictates where people move. This is why the Lemeki clan are going to Fiji. This is why they're going to Ha'apai. This is why people are being moved around, because the Tu'itonga instructed. That's why it's called the Tu'ikanukupolu. Hey, yeah, your mother's from Upolu. You have the Tu'ihatakalaua and the Tu'itonga already on Tongatapu. Go bring your relatives from Samoa to come and serve you. On Tongatapu, we already have these people that are serving the Tu'itonga, the Tu'ihatakalaua. Bring your mother's side of the family to Hahihifo. They will serve you. And I'll kind of share a couple things that are interesting. The Tu'ikanukupolu line was the third and lowest line in Tonga. And that role was to do the daily affairs, right? There was actually, the Tu'ikanukupolu was actually the most unstable line of all the kingly lines. They were very difficult to have a father to son. The Tu'itonga and the Tu'ihatakalaua were able to stabilize their lines. And what does stabilizing lines mean in ancient Tongan history? And that is having the line descend from father to son over multiple generations. That is what a stable line means, right? And so the Tu'ikanukupolu for many generations does not have that. And many times, because for whatever reason, the Tu'ikanukupolu only has like one male for multiple generations, it was very difficult that when they didn't have a male in the line, when they were looking for someone to kind of take in the Tu'ikanukupolu title, some of the Tu'ikanukupolu lines were marrying into the Tu'ihatakalaua and to the Tu'itonga line. And what happened was the instability of the Tu'ikanukupolu line, and whoever takes in the Tu'ikanukupolu line has to come from a male lineage from Tongatapu. You're not going to go bring someone who has all their male lineage in Samoa to come and be the Tu'ikanukupolu. You have to find someone with a male lineage line that ties back to Tonga to take that role. And what happens is this: because of the instability of that line and the intermarrying into the Tu'ihatakalaua and the Tu'ikanukupolu line, there were many chiefs who said, we're not interested in taking the Tu'ikanukupolu line because I have Tu'ihatakalaua or I have Tu'itonga bloodlines or relations that are much closer. That would be a downgrade to be a Tu'ikanukupolu. And so there was a lot of difficulty in filling in that role, and there was that instability that eventually led to a kind of voting system, because that was basically a natural outcome of instability, so to speak. So kind of responded to all the comments there. Now we're going to respond to kind of the context that Psalm 180 here is. Now I want to address the comments in the video itself, right? Let's kind of go through that.
And the third and most powerful, by 1610, the third and most powerful line of kings emerged, the Tu'ikanukupolu.
So when the Samoans
See, right off the bat, the video says the third and most powerful line emerged. That is that's incorrect, right? That's looking at Tonga today. in saying, oh, the Tuikano line is the head of state and projecting that to the 1600s. That was not the case in the 1600s. It was the lowest line, and it didn't have any followers on Tongatapu, and therefore had to import from the mother's side workers and laborers to execute the running of the empire, the Tongan Empire, administrative, political, and military responsibilities.
And they found the place, found it home. So now we've got this, the beginning of the Kanaka.
We thought that people in Hahaka in the east didn't want to go and face the Hifo, people who started to, these uprisings from the Hifo. They decided to bring the Samoans to go and show.
And that's an interesting thing, right? This is where you get the timelines a little mixed up and trying to say that, oh, they didn't want to deal. Let's step back. If you're saying the 1600s, that the Tuitonga Empire, from 1300s, they say was the height of the Tuitonga Empire. What did that include? That's pretty much all of Polynesia. You're telling me, this is kind of like the Tuna and Fata story here that just doesn't make sense. You're saying that the Tuihatakalawa and the Tuitonga could not deal with Hihifo? That's really what you're telling me. Now, is there instability and potential issues? Yes. But you're telling me that could not be addressed in the 1600s. This is our leaders of an empire that have loyalists, not just in Ha'apai, Vava'u, Ewa, the Niwas, but then you add Samoa itself, you add parts of Fiji in there, you add Tokelau, you add Tahiti, you're telling me that that couldn't be handled. That just doesn't make any sense. Just like the Tuna and Fata, like, oh, we kicked out the Tuitonga. The Tuitonga was, even within Samoa, had loyalists that would probably quench that quote unquote rebellion. And not to mention that Tuitonga, his mom was Samoan, and in the village that this happened was his mom's village. Once again, just kind of throwing that out there. This idea that they're treating, look, have the Samoan flags. They're treating this like Samoa is an independent nation, Tonga is an independent nation, when they're the same thing, right? Let's just say the premise is they were having issues in Hihifo. Okay, Hihifo, we're going to remind you, right? Tuitonga and the Tuihatakalaua says, we're going to remind you that if they are acting up, let's just accept that premise. We have a whole empire. And what we're going to do is we're going to install a new kingly line. We're not even going to deal with you directly. We're going to install a new kingly line, and we're going to import people from one of the islands within the empire, and we're going to flood Hihifo. And you're not even going to recognize Hihifo because we're going to bring more people from this part of the empire into the West, which is all the same people, but we have to speak in Samoan, Tongan, just for us to understand. Bring all these people from Samoa over there. We're going to establish a new kingly line, and you're going to figure it out very quickly who you're dealing with. That's another way to look at this, right? But let's come back to the video.
Wata and his Samoan relatives, they puppetized them and recruited them to the Samoan team, and they formed their own lineage.
Well, there you go.
See, and that form their own lineage. Like, what exactly does that mean? Their own lineage, where the Tongan male and a Samoan female, that's happened many times over. This guy is speaking like, oh, this is the first time, they created their own line. Who created? Why did they create this line? They created that line because the Tuihatakalawa did not want to do that job anymore, right? They basically told the Tuitonga, For a few hundred years now, we faithfully executed this role. We don't want to carry off that role anymore. The Tui Hatagalawa is going to be elevated to a little bit closer to what the Tui Tonga's line is. But we have to create another line to do the work. That's why the Tui Kanukupolu line was created. This idea that they recruited them and they started their own line. What do you mean started your own line? It's the same thing that's been done for thousands of years. Still a Tongan male line. Nothing has changed besides you put in a new kingly line to take care of the daily activities of the empire.
So when they moved there, Kolovai was one residence.
Okay.
But
Oh, like we lost connectivity here real quick. Even the internet, it can't figure out what's going on here. So
that's the main residence of the Kamapolo. And then Kamapolo, the village of Kamapolo named after Upolu, a flesh of Upolu, Kamapolo.
I love this. The proud.
The origin of that Tuikanupolu political system, it was a Samoan political system that was established in Hifo, not even a Tongan system at all.
This
I'll stop there real quick. That's another interesting thing. You know, that's actually the Xiaosi Ilayu. We love him as a guest. That's a snippet from our podcast. And he's sharing the idea that there was a voting system. That's how Taufa'ahau got into the Tuikanukupolu. But speaking with Daniela Fale and goes by Maui Tegelangi, he expresses that voting system became the default approach because of the instability of the Tuikanukupolu line. Because of the instability of not going from father to son, like I said, for whatever reason, the Tuikanukupolu line has always had a difficult time establishing a solid lineage of heirs, right? And this makes sense because when you look back at the first handful of Tuikanukupolus, it goes from father to son, father to son, father to son. Then all of a sudden, there is a mixed bag of not going to father to sons. It goes to cousins, blah, blah, blah. And then this system of voting, which it has a similarity to the Matai system, but that's an outcrop of instability. And so that's kind of the feeder behind that. And the reason why, you know, it's interesting that Tupou the first, he becomes the Tuikanukupolu, and what does he revert to? He reverts back to the Tuitonga inheritance line, the Tui Hatakalawa, and the original structure of the Tuikanukupolu, which is father to son, father to son. Okay.
Thai influence in Tonga. It's very powerful the way that influenced how Tonga's shift from the Kauhala Uta, the Tuitonga line, into where we are now with the Tuikanukupolu line.
In order to build, once again, that's also another snippet from our podcast. And it was great to have have him speak and share, because he comes from the Ha'avea side. And let me Pakilau Manase Lua. Okay, I forgot his name for a second, but he was great to have. Like you said, this Samoanization. There's a little bit of truth, because we're looking at the Tuikanukupolu line as leading today, but we have to look at it as when Tupou the first was the Tuikanukupolu and Laufiri Tonga was the Tuitonga. That was the structure for hundreds of years. Nothing, when you look at it that way, nothing structurally had really changed in that structure. And so there's this concept, because now that the Tu'ikanokopolo line is there, that there was this overtaking, this whatever. That is not the case. And I will challenge anyone. When did the Tu'itonga get defeated and the Tu'ikanokopolo got that power that it has now? I would love anybody to tell me that, because it didn't happen. It goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Laufiri Tonga gifted this to Tupou I freely. That's what legitimized Tupou I and provided just enough stability, just enough legitimacy to allow Tonga to remain sovereign and independent. And that is the reason why Laufiri Tonga did it. He was doing it for that sake. He could have easily reached out to Catholic country. He could have easily tried to rally people to go against Tupou I. But to what benefit? What's the point of challenging Tupou I and causing division, like happened in Samoa, like happened in Fiji, like happened throughout Polynesia? Yeah, you challenge each other, but then the white man comes in and colonizes you. That defeats the purpose. There was too much history, too much knowledge, too much understanding of how politics and governance works, that Laufiri Tonga was able to see the future and sacrifice his title and his what appears to be his rights as an individual for the greater and the betterment of the nation and sovereignty of Tonga.
Where we are now with the Tu'ikanokopolo line.
In order to build up political power and military power, the Tu'ikanokopolo's got to bring outside people. And so that's why there's this influx of Samoans. Thousands of Samoans were
was
brought.
already part of that with Polo and Savai, bringing thousands of their people to mostly staying in Hihifo.
And once again, they showed those videos, now that they caused it, to make it seem like there was like this invasion of Samoans. Well, number one, we got to read, like I said, these are all citizens of the Tu'itonga Empire. And the second part is, it wasn't these people coming in and then they established the Tu'ikanokopolo. The Tu'ikanokopolo was established with a male line, just like the Tu'ihatakalaua and the Tu'itonga, with a male line that is always from Tonga. That's what gave legitimacy to that title. You bring in resources to help the Tu'ikanokopolo run those things. And you see it in Tonga all the time now. When you have a noble that's brought from another area who's not the direct heir of the area that he's been installed as the new noble, he many times will import people, give people land to come and build on, start a new life. So that gives him resources to execute his responsibility as a nobleman in that area. That's exactly what happened with the Tu'ikanokopolo. The Tu'ikanokopolo title is installed. People from Samoa are brought in to help serve the Tu'ikanokopolo, to do his job and his function. And what's his job and function? To execute the responsibilities of the government, of the military, and of the political responsibilities in serving the Tu'ihatakalaua and the Tu'itonga.
Tu'ikanokopolo royal line all married Tongan women. This is a small list of some of their descendants in Tonga today.
If you notice, Tu'ikanokopolo is not in that, right? You might have noblemen, but even then that could be challenged, that these noblemen may have Tongan males as well. But still, the point is, on the Tu'i lines in those names, the Tu'i lines, that's not from a Samoan male line. That's has a Samoan female line in there.
Now, we understand that the king was also bestowed with the more ancient title, Tu'ikanokopolo title. How significant is that?
Yes. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the connection of Samoa and Tonga is to Kanakupolo, which is on the western side of Tongatapu, the main island here in Tonga. So at the moment, this king now, King Tupou VI, is installed the 24th Tu'ikanokopolo. So that's a long reign from the Tu'ikanokopolo, and it's a very exciting time because the village of Kanokopolo has been celebrating. Yesterday they've had fashion shows, they've had cultural performances.
By 1610.
Yeah, and so once again, that's true in the sense, but once again, thought that was really important. to just have a discussion on that, and really just looking of how to navigate sovereignty in the 21st century. One of the best ways to do it is to look at sovereignty, how it existed in Polynesia for thousands and thousands of years. And not only it's important to look at that, but you have to look at the right version, the real history that happened, not this foreign concept of history, to understand how Polynesia as a nation existed and how the last remaining sovereign portion of the Polynesian nation that existed, a Tongatapu, how it navigated sovereignty and survived colonization. Look at that example. That you repeat that, there's a good chance you have an opportunity to maintain sovereignty into the future. That's pretty much the show for today. Appreciate everyone for joining in and for the comments. Apologize for some of the technical difficulties we've had the throughout the evening. Really hoping we have another topic that I was hoping to get to this evening about tattoos. But just looking at the time frame, a minute, an hour 30, don't want to go too far from that. But really appreciate everyone's support. Thank you. We continually stay on track on Facebook to have 2.5 to 3 million views in 2026. We're continuing to grow on YouTube. We're trending towards, we're going to hit 2,000 subscriptions here in the next probably less than a month. So really appreciate the support there. Thank you to everyone. We continue to add a few paying members to the channel on YouTube as well, which goes a long way. Really appreciate all the support there. And then once again, every like, share, and comment does go a long way. With the tens of thousands of comments that we get on a monthly basis, it's just not feasible for us to comment on every single comment and mention, but we do our best whenever we can, and we will continue to push this forward, this effort to understand our history, explore current events, and also just topics that are important to us as Polynesians as we move forward in this new world that is changing rapidly, and how we can navigate it through Polynesian eyes. With that being said, we appreciate everyone's support. And as always, we say, be bold. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. And always stay curious. Peace till next time. Malo.